We're live.
All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to the San Antonio Cloud Computing Group. I'd like to thank everyone from the San Antonio Cloud Computing Group, the .NET Virtual Group, anyone watching that just happened to stumble here, and to everybody watching the recording. I always love it whenever people post where they're from in the chat, so if you want to do a flag emoji or just tell us where you're from, feel free to do so. I'd like to thank the .NET Foundation for both hosting this event and the work they do for developer advocacy and any assistance and help they provide developers, educational opportunities like this one. I'd like to thank Dave for producing and running the stream. We have one announcement before we get started. 2 weeks from tonight at our next meetup event, we will welcome our special guest, Christos Matskis. Christos is a senior product manager at Microsoft and will be here to tell us about secretless apps with Azure and Microsoft Identity. Okay, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our special guest, Mike Benkovich. Mike is a former Microsoft developer tools and cloud evangelist who has spent his career helping developers and enterprises explore and apply new technologies to solving information challenges. Mike, thank you for being here with us today and sharing your time and knowledge with us.
Thank you, Kellen, and hello and welcome to Permit Cloud. I am Mike Benkovich, and I am going to walk through some stuff that we've done with Azure. Just kind of a background is that I used to work at Microsoft, and I actually helped launch Azure back when it was called Red Dog back in the day. And since then, I've been consulting for about the last 10 years, doing a lot of stuff, helping people understand how to go to the cloud, how to take your applications and pick them up and move them, or build applications that are native in the cloud. A lot of stuff goes on with that. And so tonight, I want to take us on a journey, and that is landing with confidence, permit to cloud. How do you take an application and how do you drive it into the cloud? There's a number of different takeaways that we'll go through. We'll talk about how you can take an idea and turn it just from an idea into a cloud application. What goes into that? What is a cloud app? How does that distinguish it from something you might run on premises? What tools are available? You know, when you're building these apps that are always connected, how do we connect them together? What tools can we use to do that? We'll look at Visual Studio, a lot of Visual Studio today, but you can do the same things with VS Code and other tools as well, and we'll touch on those as we go. We'll also talk about resource group projects, which is a hidden gem inside of Visual Studio that allows you to go out and create a infrastructure as code, an ARM template, and be able to test the deployment and make sure that everything's working right. There's also DevOps, where we'll talk about the process of adding continual value to your project by connecting the code into a system that will publish your application all the way through for you. And then finally, we'll talk about how we can use blueprints and policies to create landing zones, so sort of a place where we can put our applications and make sure that they're running with the right kind of governance, make sure that we're keeping things so that we can run with them beyond just what we've got today. All this together is what we call the permit to cloud, which is really how do we get from idea into running application into production. And when you think about it, going to the cloud is not a one-step thing. It's not, oh, today we're going to build a cloud app and we'll be cloud developers. It's an iteration of things, and you build on top of things that you learn. And application really is it's an idea. It's where you take a little bit of data, you add some code to it, and you get some value from that. You know, something that is, you know, it can be cool. And you have to run it on some sort of infrastructure, though. Without infrastructure, it's just, you know, just an idea. It's just a thought. But once you put the infrastructure there, you've got that application. A cloud application is one that runs in a cloud data center, such as an Azure, Google, Amazon, someone else's hardware, and you provision it virtually and you go out and work with that. You are able to monitor it. You're able to make sure that it's up, that scales up and scales down. You pay for what you're using. It's very configurable, but it's also a challenge to make sure that we do it right. And just getting things to go out there and work is you know, you have to have something that you're going to do. So tonight, what I'm going to do is I had an idea. My daughter's just graduated from high school and from college, and they're going off into the world. And at that point, I thought, you know, I need to help them keep them informed, give them that dad's daily wisdom, the little bit of love that they might need. I can't be everywhere, so giving them some words of wisdom. So I came up with this idea for an application. I call it the Data App. And we're going to build the Data App tonight, and I'm going to show how we can build it as a cloud application. I wanted to take advantage of being mobile, so I want to use the mobile layouts. I want to be able to pull it up on my phone or on the desktop. I want to be able to use APIs to reduce the amount of code that I have to write. Why can't I leverage microservices that someone else has created? So what I put together was this thing called the Data App, and the Data App is a API goes out and returns back some information. It's monitored, it uses existing tools, and it's a fairly simple application to go out and build. In fact, I kind of want to get out there and build it with you right now. So I'm using Visual Studio, which today is 2019. The next version, 2022, is going to be coming out very soon. They'll have preview of that. This week was build, so there's all kinds of information about that. But let's go into Visual Studio, and what I'm going to do is I've got Visual Studio open here, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to create a new project. We're going to call this my Data App, and I'm going to put this into a place so I can get to it later. And this is a San Antonio cloud group, and so I'll put the solution into that, and I'll put this up on GitHub so that you can download it later. I'm going to use .NET 5. We used to call it .NET Core 3, Core 2. As of .NET 5, they brought them together, all the .NETs, and so now I'm using .NET 5, which is a current release, and I'm just going to build a simple web application. So with this, what we'll do is we'll go out and create this, and I'm going to spend about 5 minutes just kind of setting up what our application is. So this goes out, creates the project, and then we'll load up our information for us. Visual Studio is a great place to do this. I could also do this inside VS Code by going out to VS Code and create a .NET new, and then from there I could create a web app, I could create APIs, all of those different kinds of applications. But as you can see with good old Visual Studio, one of my favorite tools, when I create it, I've got a very simple application. I've got my www root, I've got a folder for some pages. In here, there's an index page that I'm going to work with. I've got some app settings, a couple other files that make this thing into what it is. And if I look at this, you'll see that here's my main page. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of code here. One of the things I want to do is be able to configure this and run it so I know where I'm running. So I'm going to use some of the dependency injection to inject some configuration values. So doing a using of the in here at using, and we're going to use Microsoft's extensions, and the configuration is the tools that will bring in the namespace for what I need. And then I'm going to inject an iConfiguration, and we'll call that config. And the great thing about this is that then down here on the main page when you come in, there's just a little bit of text here. We're just going to put in a bold little text here and say app config, and I'm going to read in a value from that for environment name, env name. And that environment name is coming from the configuration, which is a variable I'm pulling from the configuration. In my app settings, if I go over here to app settings, you'll see that up here I can add some settings. So I might have environment name, and we'll call this local because we're running it locally here. I might have another one. We're going to have favorite color, because I like a little bit of color in my applications. I think that really helps. And we'll put in a light blue color for when we're developing here at home. Inside our application, I'm going to add a little bit more code, and this is going to be the words of wisdom. And so I need to pull up this, and in my toolbox, I have a little code snippet I'm just going to drag in here. And it's pretty simple. It's a little H2 that has an ID of joke, and then the script goes out, calls a API, and then returns back and sets the HTML value of that to the joke. But to kind of give it a little bit of color, let's add a style attribute here, and that style attribute is going to show my background color. And we'll just kind of come down here to color, and again, we'll pull that in from our configuration where we read the value for favorite color. And just make sure we put a semicolon to close that out. So as you can see, what this does is it goes out and it's just going to run our application. If I say view this in the browser, it'll go out, it's going to build everything that it needs to build, and then it'll open up our application. And I just want to make sure that it works before we go too much further. So while this is opening up, then you can see here's my local index running, and we should be able to see exactly what this looks like. And the joy of this is that you get to see that we are indeed running locally. I've got my light blue color so you can see exactly what's going on. And if I were to change these different things, I'd be able to go out and work with it. Now that's my basic application. The goal is I need to turn this into something that is actually going to be usable. And that is going beyond just the idea to where do I run it. Now I can run it on premises, on my own hardware, on my own machines if I've got them, or I could run it in the cloud. And there's advantages to each one. On premises, I've got capacity. Maybe I have capacity. Maybe I've got. Maybe I need to buy more servers. There's some challenges that you might get into with trying to keep your hardware secure. All of those things that you have to worry about when you're going on premises can be addressed in the cloud by going into a secure data center that has on-demand provisioning, virtualization of compute, and all those other things. I can provision very quickly, very rapidly go out and provision the hardware I need and be able to pay just for what I use. And when I'm done with it, I can tear it down and I stop paying for it. I pay only for what I've consumed. The great thing about this is that there's a number of different kinds of compute, storage, lots of things that we could get into. And in fact, other sessions, we could dive real deep into those kinds of things. But just for purpose of what we're doing a simple web application. So doing that, I need to be able to have a subscription where I'm going to push this into. I take my code and I compile it, I build my executable. Well, I need to put it out into something. And in Azure, we have containers. We have the idea of a subscription is a billing container. It's a billing instrument. It's a place where I can log in and I can have access control, allow different people in and do different kinds of things. Within there, we organize our resources, actual services that are running, into what are called resource groups. And resource groups are a collection. It's a loose organizational tool that I can use to put things that share a common life cycle. For instance, I might have a website or a demo, and I put that all in the same resource group. When I'm done with it, I can just delete the resource group, and it all goes away. One of the nice things about resource groups is that I can give access to my developer to just that one resource group, and then they can go out and do the work they need to. The idea of access to Azure is understanding what is called role-based access control. And you start out with an Active Directory tenant, and you have users inside of there. And inside of that tenant, then we can attach their access into the subscription, into resources at all these different levels. And that's really how we are able to organize and make sure that people are getting to the right thing for the stuff that they need to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to give access to our user by going into Azure. And I actually have a subscription. This is my own subscription. Let me drag this over here. This is this is my website, benkotips.com. From here, you can get to Azure, and inside of Azure, I've got all of my subscriptions and resource groups and places where I want to be able to go out and do things. Now, I'm going to go to my resource group, and I'm going to create a new one. And this resource group I'm going to create is going to be for my developer that's working on this particular application. So I'm going to go down to my demo subscription. I'm going to give this a name. We'll call this RG. And we'll call it Dad App, and we'll call it Dad App. So we're going to create this for our resource group of the Dad App. I picked the data center. I generally have been putting stuff into Central US as the default, but this is a default location. It does not limit you from creating resources and other data centers, but you can pick one that's close to you. Different data centers have different capabilities, but most of the big ones are the East-West US There's also UK. There's the ones in Asia. There's over 65, 75. I lose count on how many data centers there are. But I can create this resource group. And then once I've done that, I can go out and I can say, here's my data app. And I can go out and I can select this. And I can grant access for my developer. Now notice this is a container of all the resources that get created. And I can create them manually. I can create them in the portal. I can create them from Visual Studio. I can create them from the command line. Lots of different ways that we can go out and do this. I have a log of all the things that are happening here. I've got deployments that are running. I can even see costs on a resource group level. I can turn on insight so I can see what's going on. You get advisor recommendations. Lots of good stuff inside of Azure for making this easy to work with. But probably the most important thing is when I want to give a developer access to this. Now, I've got a developer that I want to go out and build my data app. We'll call him the dad dev. And we're going to give him owner role access to this. So I'm going to go into my access control. And then under add a role assignment, we'll just hop over here. And I'm going to pull this up and I'm going to grab the role of owner, and I'm going to give this to my dev dad. And there's my developer dad right there at the bottom. Now this is a login that I created for doing demos because when you've got a an admin or an owner or a super user account, it's better to not give the keys to the kingdom. So by doing this, then my developer, who is dev dad, should be able to go out and see that data app resource group. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull my cursor over here, and we've got our application, and I can publish this out into there. If I go back over to the portal and log into portal.azure.com, this time logging in as the dev dad, what you'll see is that I have access to a shared resource group. If I look at all the resource groups that are out there, I can see I only have access to the shared resource group. I should also have access to the dev dad because I just added that, I thought. So let's check our role assignments. And let's search for dev. And make sure that that's there. It is. And so now my developer dad goes out here, right click, and I can publish this application that we just created, which has our data app. I'm going to right click and I'm going to publish this, and we're going to make this into a cloud aware application, meaning it runs in the cloud. Right click, and then I can go out and pick on where I want to run this. I'm going to say, let's run this inside of Azure, click on next, and then I can choose what kind of compute. Do I want to run a virtual machine? Do I want to use containers? Linux or Windows. For purposes of this demo, I'm just going to stay with Windows. Click on next. And then I'm going to go out and I'm going to pick out and create a resource, an application here. So I'm going to click on add a new app resource. We're going to see that the data app is in my list of resource groups I can deploy to. We'll call this my data app. And I'm going to just put today's data app 527. And then I'm going to create a new hosting plan. And for that, that is going to be when you have a server that you're running an application, you want to be able to host it somewhere. So we'll just call this my hosting plan. And I can pick the size of a machine I want. I'm going to go with my free size because I like things that are free. And we'll just say OK, and then click on create. And before I did that, there was a button here that said I could export this as a template. That's okay, because I can get to the template in other ways too. But what this is doing is it's actually going out and it's doing a deployment for me into that resource group. So if I come back over here to the resource groups and I go to data app, one of the places where I can see that deployment is by going into the deployments section of it. And in here, you'll see here's the deployment, and it's doing a website deployment. I can take a look at that, and I can even get down into the template, which is a JSON format, JavaScript object notation, where it's got all of the different resources it's creating. It created an app service and it created an app service plan. Difference is the plan, the hosting plan is the hardware that runs all the different websites. And so it's kind of like a server farm, if you're familiar with that. Number of different parameters, but if I wanted to, I could download and save and use that. Otherwise, I go over here and I can see here's my deployment, and I take a look at it, and here's my website. It's been created. Now, if I browse to this, you would expect to see what? An application running? Possibly, but unfortunately, we haven't pushed any code yet. So what we'll see instead is just going to be how to get started building these applications. So what we're going to do is we're going to push the code now. So now that we've got the place where we're going to push this, we're going to say finish, and this is now going to create a publish profile for this application. So this is going to go out, and it created this, and I can click on publish, and this then will go out and build it, and then actually publish it out into Azure. So let this thing go. And while that's running, if I take a look at my application, so while this is running, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up here, and inside of my Data App, you'll see I've got configuration. And one of the things that I put into the configuration was the environment name and the favorite color. And I can have settings that we can add here. We can call this env name. We're going to call this cloud aware. Say OK. And then have another setting. Favorite color. Red. No, blue. Let's do light red, light pink. And if I say OK, now I have to save these before it actually gets applied to the application. But as I can see over here, right now this is running, and it's going to take it a few minutes to finish publishing. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to update the settings so that they're inside of this, and say save and continue. And then when that gets done, it'll update the web application. And as you can see, I have all these configurations that are going on here. Now, some of the other things that are nice about this particular type of an application is that inside of an app service, I've got all the standard stuff at the top. On the left-hand side, you can see that I've got configuration, so I can configure how the application is going to run. I've got authentication, which I can turn on, and I can run an authentication service on the front of my app service. There's scaling. There's an app service plan that I can adjust and scale up or scale out. Nice thing about this is that I'm running on the free tier. If I wanted to, I could go to a production workload, and depending on what I pick, I can get different prices for the amount of compute that's going on that. Once that is done, then the application will go ahead and show us what it looks like. So now this is running inside of Azure here, and notice it's now running in our cloud aware, where we've got the pink background. So that's pretty cool. We've got a cloud aware application. That's the first phase of going into the cloud. What does it mean to be cloud aware? Well, it means that we're running in the app, or in the cloud. We publish from Visual Studio. We've used existing code, minimal changes, and we were able to configure how the application runs directly from the portal. But there were a couple of things I'm concerned about. Repeatability. My developer went out and created this thing. How can we repeat it? How do we make sure that we're clicking on the right things? Using click to deploy seems to me that there are some concerns with that, because you have to make sure that the machine that you're deploying from has the right builds, has the same version of Visual Studio. There's also governance, the naming of things. You might have different names of different services in different places, but how do you enforce and work with things like naming standards and get that to be a little bit better? And so this is really, the first step is going into a cloud aware. And when you think about your journey going into the cloud, it's not just a walk in the park. It's got to be something that is multiple steps. And we start out with a cloud-aware app, but then we optimize and we take advantage of things that we can do in the cloud, things that Azure is really good at, things like scaling or having app insights or other services connecting up to it or sharing data or doing failover. All of that configuration is important, but you need to invest in the cloud, because when you look at doing different kinds of clouds, each cloud has its own strengths. And when you invest in a cloud and you take advantage of that, you can really get more from it. And, like I said, the journey through the cloud is going through all of these different phases to get to the point where you're really enterprise ready. So what's the next step? We've got this cloud-aware application. The next level would be doing something that's more optimized. How do we, do code collaboration? How do we set up our infrastructure as code? Create templates so that we're not deploying from the portal, so we're not deploying from Visual Studio, but are actually having code that we create and manage and work with. I showed how you can get the template from the portal, but is that the right kind of a template you want to work with? And finally, adding DevOps, which is the process of being able to add continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment to your application. And so all of these things are kind of taking us from, we've got an application that runs in the cloud. Now let's make it repeatable so we can do it over and over again. One of the tools that's in Visual Studio, a hidden gem, is called the Cloud Resource Group Project. You can also work with ARM templates in VS Code. There's currently a preview of a new tool called Bicep, which is a transpiler that generates ARM templates for you using a higher level language. I'm not going to go into Bicep tonight, but it is something that will be probably in the next, very soon, will be very common. Everyone will be wanting to use it. But using templates for your services and that work with the ARM is coming back to figuring out how do we create that infrastructure as code? How do we describe what that looks like? The resource management service inside of Azure uses a JSON format for kind of laying out what that looks like. And so we use that to describe out in code what our infrastructure looks like. Nice thing about it is it's scriptable and it's repeatable. So we can go out and we can create this and then do it over and over again. For our Data App, we're going to create a simple application template that's going to have a hosting plan. Hosting plan is the hardware that's going to run. Inside of that, there's going to be one or more app services. And I can run one, I could run 1,000 different web apps within that host. And it's limited only to what density I want, compute, how busy these different applications are. And because I can change the size of it and the number, I can scale that out and then do the loading on that. The other thing is having instrumentation so that we can see what's going on. Application Insights is a great tool that will let us see what's going on. It monitors stuff and it gives us our connection strings and allows us to, App Insights allows us to get notified when resources are being overused. We can see failures. We can get into a lot of detail on that. But App Insights is a great tool. We should do a session on that as well. So let's go out and we're going to create a resource group project, and we're going to do that with in our existing code. So I'm going to go back over here into Visual Studio, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to, let's see. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my Solution Explorer, and we're going to, first of all, connect. Okay. I'm going to go into my Solution Explorer. I'm going to right click on the solution, and I'm going to add a new project to it. And this is going to be a new project inside of Visual Studio. If I do a search on the templates for cloud, you'll find that there's a number of different ones. There's cloud services. There's also resource group projects. So I'm going to search for resource group. And so this is the project that I'm going to create, which is going to be an ARM template project. What it does is it creates a single template folder that I can use for working with this. We'll call this my deploy. And in this, I'm going to go out and I'm going to get a starting point for what I want to work with. Now, inside Visual Studio, there are a number of different templates that I can choose from as starting place. Linux virtual machine sets, Service Fabric. I've got virtual machines, Ubuntu, web apps with CDNs, document databases. I could start with a web app, which is going to give me a basic, a good starting point for just a simple little web application. Now, one of the things that's nice is that if I want to, I can also pull templates from a GitHub repo. Down here, you'll see that there are some GitHub quick start templates. And this is where people have contributed, myself included, to what I think there's more than 1,000 templates that are part of this. And so you can search for what you're looking in here. Normally, it would come up and give us a list of things. But I also, by going into Visual Studio, I was able to add my own GitHub repo where I've got a template that I'm going to start with called Permit to Cloud Web App. And what this is it's a basic web app that has the naming standards that I want and applies a couple of other things. And I'll show you exactly what this looks like. So first of all, what it did is it gave me these resources here. I've got references. I've got a deploy resource group, which is a PowerShell script that I can use for testing the deployment. I have a website JSON file. I'm going to add another file to this, and we'll call this, I'm going to say add new item. And this is where I'm going to add a parameter file. One of the things about it when you add a parameter file into this type of project is you have to go to the properties and set the build action to be content. Just a quirky little thing when I set up my golden templates. But here I've got my website, and if you look at the JSON, it's a lot of words, it's a lot of stuff in here. And to make it a little bit easier, you've got this JSON outliner. If you go under your view and you scroll down to toolbars and you go over here, somewhere over here, it's other windows, there are other windows, and then up here is the JSON outliner. You can also just go up here and search for JSON outliner and just click on that, and it'll open up the window on the left. Nice thing about this is it lets me see and explore very quickly everything that's in here. So I've got my hosting plan, and when I click it, it takes me right to the hosting plan. If I go back over here and I open up, where does that come from? It's actually coming from a variables, and the variables are pulling in from parameters. If I collapse this down a little bit, you'll see that the basic structure of this file is that I have the schema, I have parameters, variables, resources, and I might have outputs as well. Inside of the parameters, these are things that are coming in. I have the application name, I have a SKU name, I have the metadata, I have the SKU capacity, I have the variables where I'm taking these. And for instance, my website name, I'm just using the app name from the parameters. For the hosting plan name, I'm going to have a naming standard. So I'm going to have the app name concatenated -plan. Insights, app insights, I'm using the app name -AI. The other thing is that down here in the resources, I can go down and I can get to each of those different things by just clicking on them. Another thing that I can do is I can right click on this and add a resource to this. And this opens up another nice little wizard for adding a section to my JSON code. So in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a configuration settings for that. And it's taking lots of time here to load, but eventually it does. And inside here, you can see that I could add the app insights. I could add an auto scale. There are modules for SQL, SQL servers, for databases, storage accounts. I'm going to go up here. I'm going to add a configuration, and we're going to do a configuration for our website. Call this config. And then once I do that, and I click here, it'll take me to where I can see this section for app settings. And I've got my properties. And here I can say my environment name. Instead of doing it from the portal, I can go out and say this is coming from here, cloud and then favorite color. And we can take this and say light green. And I could add other properties to this if I wanted to, but the nice thing is that I've got the opportunity to go out and manage my entire template like this. Now, one of the things that this project does really well is it allows me to test and make sure that this is working. So if I right-click on my deployment project, I can go out and I can test the deployment right from Visual Studio. So in here, you can see I'm going to go out to my RG Data App. I'm going to use the deployment template, and there's my parameters. And then I just need to put a name on this. I'll call this my dad app. And we'll call it SACG for San Antonio Cloud Group dad app. And say save. And then I can deploy it. And what it does is it's going to go out and it runs a PowerShell script that goes out and packages together a couple of things, but then it runs the deployment because it runs a PowerShell scriptlet that does the deployment. And so it goes out, verifies that the template is valid, and then it will go through doing that deployment. In fact, I can go to my resource group again, looking at this and just looking at my deployments. You'll see that here's the new deployment that I just started. And as it's running, I can click on it and I can watch the performance of it. So it's creating this. It's still in progress. So it's creating the app insights. It created the server farm. It added an auto scale settings. And then it will take me out to where that is. So I can click on this. And here's my data app. So let's go back over to this. And if I refresh my resources, you'll see that there's my SACG for the data app, and I can show the hidden types, and then I can see how things are running. So the first one I did doesn't really follow any naming standards, but you'll notice that the names on all of the other ones are following what I would want, which is something that can help me provide more information so that it's easier to manage and live with this stuff once we've deployed it. Infrastructure as code is a great thing, and it's a great way to go out and make this all work. So what I'm going to do here is close this out, and then let's talk about code collaboration. And this is where we want to enable the teamwork, right? Because my application, my code is, my developer's been out building it. Now I need to bring in some other people. So how do you collaborate? And that comes back to, figuring out what works for you. Some people like the team server, TFS, what it used to be called. There was a code management, TFVC, which is a Visual Studio kind of a source code sharing. But a lot of people have gone to Git. And what's interesting is that Microsoft has gone all in on Git, all the way to the point of GitHub. GitHub and dev.azure.com are both great places to have public and private Git repositories. The nice thing about them is that you can use the pipelines in DevOps, or you can use the GitHub Actions if you're using GitHub to go ahead and automate all of the building and releasing of the code. So for the purposes of tonight, I'm going to use a Git repo, and I'm going to put in the process for being able to do that. And then we'll set up a continuous delivery, which is using GitHub Actions to actually do that deployment for us. By turning on that continuous delivery, we're going to save on all of the knowledge that has to be there to know how do we do our publishing of things. And it'll let us go through and do that in a nice, reportable, agile sort of way. So let's do this. I'm going to go back into Visual Studio here. And I'm going to open it up. And it'll take just a second here.
I'm going to ask a quick question to you, Mike.
Sure.
When you did the ARM template and added it to the project, does that make it to where you don't need to do the environment variables there on the Azure portal?
When you say environment variables?
When you did the configuration settings and you did it inside your project there.
Yeah, so by adding my properties, these are now going to be deployed as part of that code. So like all of my settings, and a lot of times with applications, there's a lot of stuff in the web config. You can move all of that into the properties for the app settings.
So anytime you make a change inside that file locally and you go to deploy it, it's going to automatically do that as well.
So this is the infrastructure I'm deploying. And so whenever I deploy the infrastructure, it would update and overwrite what's there. So yeah.
Okay, well that seems really fantastic for scaling. So I just wanted to double check that you didn't need to do anything else, any other steps or anything on the portal side of things.
Nope. No, and the other thing that we can do is there are more complex ARM templates, then we could dive deeper into it. But you've got connection strings you can also put in there. Some of the things that I do, I've got a deployment here. Let me show this one. I'm going to go out and I'm going to add an alternate deploy. This is like a futuristic, much more cloudy, appy thing. And we'll call this my advanced my next demo, my next deploy. So this one is a ARM template that has a key vault and some Cosmos storage. And the way that it's wired up is it's taking the secrets and storing them inside of a key vault, and then I'm providing the configuration setting to pull that value from the key vault. So if I take a look at this is a much more complex template. We're talking 500 lines long, but it does some interesting things. And to talk to the idea of having a unique app name, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so you can see. So my variables, I've got a suffix where I always put in the location and I put an instance number, because I like knowing what things are going to be deployed into what places. I create a unique app name that includes the deployment date, which gives me the last 4 digits of the deployment. And then I create a key vault with the name key vault and the suffix on it. And then I've got a hosting plan. But the whole idea of this deployment here is that it allows me to go out and create a pretty complex set of things. And then for the settings, when I look at my JSON outline, if I go down to my resources, and here's my website, and I go to the configuration, you'll see that in here, I'm pulling in not just my environment and my favorite color, but I'm also pulling in from the key vault a key vault message, which I might put on my page. And that then is using the key vault's value to store those secrets. I also have storage and connection strings. So I've got a data context for SQL Azure, another one for Cosmos, and another one for Azure Storage. And so these are all pulled in from there. By the way, if you're interested in going to this, let's see here. I'm going to put into this GitHub. The Git repo that this is actually stored in, if you're interested in going out to see it, is a Git repo that I've got on GitHub that is a public, and you can go down to permit to cloud, and there's the key vault with vault and storage. So, but this is, and I might just run this deployment. I'm not going to use it for anything, but I'll just deploy it so you can kind of see sort of what it does and what it looks like. So I'm going to create a new one. In this case, I'm going to create into the same resource group, but I'm going to change the parameters. And in here, you see the parameter page is much more complex. This maps out to the top of this file where I've got all of my settings for how I want my parameters to go. So like, for instance, allowed values, I've got global, central US, East US, or West US. Default value is going to be the central US. My default value for the deploy date is today's date, using the month and the day. So I've got some default kinds of things I can do in here. In here, I'm going to go out and let's do a new deployment. And we'll edit the parameter file. And we'll call this my next dad app. And we're going to use the environment name of cloud. We'll use light gray. We'll leave that as null. We're going to have a SQL login. So this is going to be interesting because I'm going to use SQL admin as my adminion. And then I've got a password that I can either type in here, or I can actually use Key Vault to pull that value in. And I have a shared Key Vault in my shared resource group. And so I'm going to use that. And down here, you'll see I've got my SQL password, which I use for a lot of different things. So I never have to type it. In fact, my developer doesn't even need to know what it is because it's in the Key Vault. So I'm able to very much keep this safe. Now I'm going to go ahead and deploy this and save. And now this is going to go out and it's going to run. And when it gets done, we'll be able to compare what it creates inside of the Azure portal. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I just thought it was interesting and unique, kind of a way of managing things kind of in one place. I know I've done a lot of development where I've had to go and edit things, the configuration and everything on the actual Azure portal, and being able to do it within Visual Studio or an editor or something like that.
VS Code works really well for this as well. And in fact, the VS Code has quite a lot of really good capabilities when it comes to working with the exact same template. So if I was to go into VS Code, I can work with the same types of things by going into the deployment. Let's just take a look at this. Here's my next deploy. There's my Azure deployment file. This does a really good job of telling me like when I'm not using something. So for instance, if I change this to be Cosmos 2 name, that would get grayed out. And but the linter and the other things that are in here that makes developing with the ARM files inside of VS Code is pretty impressive. But to come back to where we are, we've now deployed, and the next thing we want to do is to collaborate. And so to collaborate, we're going to add this to source control. And by default, I'm going to go to the Git as my place of my choice of where I'm going to deploy to. And then I can go out and I can pick my repository name. And we're going to go San Antonio Cloud, and I'm going to call this PTC, Permit to Cloud. And we'll make this public. And then we'll go ahead and create and push this. So it'll take my code and now make it into something that I can collaborate and I can work with the rest of the people on my team. So simple as that. Now we're collaborating. So now that we are collaborating and doing our DevOps, and now we want to go into the next, which is really investing in the cloud and going the next level, which is setting up our DevOps and that whole process. Once this is done, and this is running really quite slow for some reason. Let's go ahead and close out these windows I'm not using. So at this point, let's see. Visual Studio just seems like it's just hanging on me. But what I want to do is I'm going to talk about continuous delivery, and that is the part where we've got the code inside of a code repository. Now I want to set up a process that will go through and do that publishing of my application out to the cloud for me. And in order for that to happen, I just need this thing to finish whatever it's doing, and then we can continue. So one of the great things about Visual Studio is that if and when it does seem like it's not doing very well, I could kill it and start a new instance and see if that helps. So let's open this back up. And yeah, so any other questions while I'm waiting for the tools to work for me? So now this is going to let us get into the code repository here, set this up. So it's been created as a local repo. I can tell because the Git icons are all decorated and they show that it's now in a repository. I believe I'm going to need to do a commit and sync to be able to push this up into the cloud. But let's right click on this. And for doing a pipeline to publish this, you're going to find that inside of the Visual Studio, there is a feature that allows me to work with GitHub Actions. And GitHub Actions are a series of services that I can run that will go out and do different tasks for me. Azure DevOps Pipe has a tool called Pipelines, which is a very similar construct where I put different tasks and iterate it through a file that's called YAML, and it allows me to go out and describe exactly how I want that to work. If I do a search for the GitHub Actions, inside of the options, there's a place for turning on the GitHub Actions from the preview. So there's a place in here. So if I go Actions, and let's go to this and go to preview features. And down here, you'll see GitHub Actions support and publish. So when I right click and go to publish, if I create a new profile, if I have a GitHub repo, which I do now, I didn't before, when I go out and I say create a new deployment for this, what it does is I can say publish, pick my place where I'm going to go. This one is going to go into our newly named templated version of the app service. So I can click next. And then once this loads, then I can see that here's my Data App. And the one that we're going to go to is going to be the SACG Data App. Click on next, and then we can finish this. But before I do that, let's make sure that we've got this configured. And so we're going to commit and then push this. And this is where we need to set this up. So, and this is a public repository, and say push. And once this has a public or a GitHub project associated with it, now it's going to go out and it'll push this. Then I can go out and create the new, go to Azure, Windows, and then my Data App. Click Next, and you'll see I've got a CI/CD using GitHub Actions. And it generates a YAML file that it has all the steps for going out and doing that publishing. So we're going to do that this time instead of using the click to deploy from Visual Studio. What this will do is it'll create that YAML file for me that has all the steps it needs to be able to go out and do that publishing. If you're curious what it looks like, I can click on the edit the workflow, and this will open up the YAML file that is the steps that go out and publishes the application. So this does a build and deploy on the push of the master branch. The app name is SACG Data App. It uses a secret that got uploaded into GitHub for that. It runs on Windows latest, and then the steps goes through and does these different things. So the first thing is to go through and do a restore after it sets up the environment. Then it does a build, and then it can do the test. And all this is it's just a file that goes through and allows us to build and publish the application. So these are the steps: restore, build, test, publish, deploy to Azure, where it's doing the deployment with Azure Web Apps Deploy. It passes in the package name, the app name, and the publish profile, and then it saves the artifacts when it's done. Now, this will run when I publish it by going out and doing a commit and push. So if we do that, commit and push, and then I go up here and say add build and deploy. And I can do a commit and sync. Save. And so this will then take all those changes and push it up into the repo, where if I open this up, then once it gets done, then I could go over to GitHub, and on GitHub, in here you'll see, here's my repositories. So and then from here, there's my repo that we just created. And you'll notice it added a folder for workflows. And then there's our code. But there's an action that is sitting over here. And this action is actually running right now. So that YAML file, when it gets committed, is pushed up into here. You can click and watch it as it's running. And this is a pretty neat process to watch, because it's no longer using my machine to do the build. It's not dependent on my version of Visual Studio or any developers. It's now running the same process every time it goes, because it goes out and installs the tools it needs, pulls in all of the pieces, and then creates a log of everything that is going on to do the build and the deploy of the application. It'll even run your unit tests, and if any of them fail, it will stop the deploy. The neat thing about the GitHub Actions is it's very configurable to customize, and you can do things like working with different aspects of the pipeline to have more information. Like maybe I might want to have a run number or something like that added to the application. But now that you see that this ran, when I did my deploy, if I go back over to our app into Azure, and here's our Data App. Now when I go out to browse to it, and this is our SACG Data App, is running with the green, and it's got the name is the cloud, and it's all good. So that process of getting us to where we've got the application running through a deployment that's running from GitHub Actions, I can even see inside of the portal. So if I go to the portal and I go to the deployment center, the nice thing is that Azure knows that it's been hooked up to the deployment, so it can see the deployment settings and manage the profile. So the source is coming from here, but if I take a look at the log, you can see that here's the deployment and the commit. Even if you click on that, that'll take you to where you can see all of the different parts of the deployment. And if you want to browse to where the deployment is set up, you can click through and go through it from there. So that is kind of a quick overview of how we can get to deploying code using the continuous delivery. Now, we've been cloud optimized. We've got our DevOps. We've got our collaboration. We're doing configuration in the cloud. We're managing the life cycles. We've got the delivery going on. The next level is getting into the things that are adding that governance. And the governance part of this is where you're now working for an enterprise. You're no longer just working on your own environment or a small shop. You need to be able to have reports on how much you're spending in the cloud. So tagging is important. You might have operations teams that are going to go out and look at this. You might want a dashboard to build out just so they can see exactly what they've got going. You might have policies saying what types of services you can run, whether you've got logging, auditing turned on. There's a number of different policies you can turn on to limit and constrict or put guardrails around your subscriptions so that things deploy the way they should. And so getting cloud invested is going into those operational things, those dashboard things, and adding that. One of the things we can do is we can set up and work with things inside of Azure called policies to be able to allow us to set that up. Blueprints is a tool that is used inside of Azure to be able to go out and work with those governance concerns. Because you think about it, you've got this big investment and you want to make sure you're doing it right. And there's this tank of things you need to be thinking about, things like naming standards. The fact that when we deployed originally, we just had these random names. You really should have something that is going to tie down a little bit closer. Your location, because you can deploy to different data centers, doesn't mean you should. You should be thinking about it. Some regions are, have paired data centers that you would want to put together. So getting the selection on that. Using tags so that you can do reports on how much things are cost, or whether it's a development or the life cycle, or maybe it's a tier 5, and the data sensitivity. You can use tagging so I can go out and find all of the high sensitive, critically sensitive data, and I can use tags to tell me what resources are working with that. If I implement that correctly, cost management, the best practices, and then finally all of the DevOps stuff. I created some bit.ly links that you can use to go out and get to each of these different centers, but there's documentation that's out there that goes deep into all of these different areas. But one of the things that they talk about in Azure is creating like a landing zone, something where the governance is already built in, and you've got a way to go out and create this environment and allow your developers to get in, be able to access just what they need, maybe have shared resources, shared infrastructure, but you want it to be compliant and follow your guidance. Azure Blueprints is a way that you can set up and implement that, where you can specify things like your resource groups that are going to be common. You can create a resource group for the application with these blueprints. You can create access for different groups of developers. You might have an operations group. You might have a developer group. You might have just a deployment group. But you can use all of these different things, wrap it up into what's called a blueprint to be able to go out and do that deployment. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to create I've created a blueprint, and I'll show you what it looks like. But my demo app blueprint has a resource group that I created for the application. So that application has an application owner. That's my dad dev that I assigned. And there's a shared dashboard that they use for that. Then within that also, I've got a key vault in a shared resource group, and I want to make sure that my app owner is able to get in there and work with it. So to do this, I'm going to go into our last demo for tonight, and that is going into Azure and going in as the owner of Azure here. So I'm going to go into this guy, and I'm going to go up and I'm going to go into my blueprints. And I've been working with blueprints for a little while. If I want to create a new blueprint, I can create it just by going into blueprints and then say create a new one. You'll find that you can start with an empty blank blueprint, but there are also a bunch of blueprints that have already been created. for instance, ISO 2701 or PCI. There's a Swift. If you're in the UK, there's UK ones. Australian government has some that they've started with, or Canada. These are blueprints that have different things put in there. So for instance, common practices or common policies, if I start out with that and create a new blueprint using that, I'll call this my common policies. And I'm going to use a BP dash for the name of it. It's a set of different things. I set the location of where this is going to be taking place. Now, within Azure, I can do this at a subscription and assign this at each subscription. Subscriptions are contained inside of management groups. So I can group together different subscriptions that are used for test versus production, or maybe QA. Or maybe I've got training or something that is, just all development. But I can have different groups of management groups that are underneath my tenant, and I can apply this at any of those levels. So I could go and say, pull my demos, and maybe go to the particular one. So I've got a demo subscription that I want to apply this to. So I'm going to go out and select that, and then click on next, and I can see the artifacts that are on here. This says add a default tag and a value to all resources. For the production resource group that gets created, it's going to allow locations for new resources, so I can limit it to be just Central US and East US, or maybe the UK, maybe I go in Dublin and Amsterdam, or whatever the things are. I can also have a policy that allows certain resource types. Going back, I could also create just a blank one. Now, I've actually created a blueprint, and this is the one that I've been using lately. And what it does is it's going to be a place where I create a resource group for an application team. And they have an idea, they want to build an app. So they've got the shared resource group, they've got the app owner. I'm going to go out and I can say, I could edit this and I could add other things to it, come over to the artifacts, and maybe I want to add at the high level, I could add another artifact type of maybe a resource group or an ARM template. I could take an ARM template that I created and have that be part of a deployment, so that whenever I deploy this, it'll take that, or a role assignment or a policy. In here, you'll see I've got a couple where I have a shared key vault. And so this has got the actual ARM template for that shared key vault. And then I look at the parameters. I can specify the parameters at runtime. Now, if I make a change to it, I can save a draft, and then I can publish a version of it. The thing about it is that once I've published, then I can assign it. And I can assign this by clicking on Assign. And this then allows me to go out and say, here's my assignment name. We're going to say Demo App. And I'm going to call this the Mom app, because Mom needs to be able to put these out there too. So we're going to create a Mom app next. And we're going to use managed identity using the system assigned. We're going to select the user. We'll call this Dad, DevDad. And DevDad is going to be the main person that's going to be doing the development for Mom. And then the resource group name, we're going to call this RG Mom app. And we'll put this also into Central US. And then the dashboard name, we're going to call this the Mom app. And Mom app dashboard. And it's going to share the key vault, so that app owner is always able to go out and do that. Now, when I assign this, what it does is it's going to go out and it's going to iterate through all of those ARM templates, resource group creation, RBAC assignments, and policy assignments. And it goes through and it's actually doing the assignment of this. And it takes it a little bit of time to actually get applied. So if I go out and I look at the assigned blueprints, and I look at the date assigned and sort by that. So I've got today's date. I can go out and I can see this assignment. And I can see that it'll actually show me the resources as it's going on. So if I view the activity log, it'll then let me see how this is being applied and the operations that are going on. So this takes it usually a few minutes to get created, and once it's done, then I can go out and I will be able to assign this now to the Data App, who's going to be working on this application. So this is still waiting, but that is using the blueprints feature, which allows me then to go out and use that same blueprint. So I might have a blueprint for a SQL Server and web application. I might have another blueprint for a Kubernetes and Docker using Cosmos. I might have another for each of these different kinds of applications, and I can go out and I can use that then when I set up a new application team. And so, pick an application you want to run it into the cloud. You do the blueprint, you hand the code over, they set up their the pipelines and go through the iteration on getting the stuff out there. And then you can make sure that everything looks the way that it should. When you get done, yes, I end up with a blueprint. If I go back over here to my DAD user and I go back out to my resource groups, if I refresh this, then I should be able to see the MOM app will show up in my list as well. And sometimes it takes it a few minutes to happen. And then the assignment. So there's the MOM app, and I can check the access for this so the development team can get there. And we're going to search for DevDad. And they are indeed set up as the owner, and then they would be able to go out and build and do their application development with that. So that is working with blueprints and kind of getting to the point where we want to be enterprise ready. We've got the dashboards, we've got tagging, we have all of these different things. Enterprises also do things where they've got permit to build versus permit to operate, and different kinds of structures for saying, okay, well, I want to be able to go out and build this, but before we turn it on in production, maybe there's some things that we need to do. And so thinking about that, putting together a library of reference architectures and documentation, all of that needs to be done. Someone needs to sit down and be thinking through that stuff, thinking through how do I manage costs? How do I manage compliance? How do I manage that operational intelligence? But all of that stuff kind of comes together when you are taking your enterprise and you're going all in to the cloud. Some considerations is that, the last mile, making sure that what we've built is usable, that we're able to go out and have a great solid operational running of things. We've got the building the road versus creating a path. This is how we're building, not just a one-time getting to the cloud. We're actually making it so that we can do this over and over again. The idea of white chip versus blue chip apps. Do you go out and do the very large application and have a big team of people doing that, or do you take the smaller apps, the low-hanging fruit, and work with them? Sometimes if you are putting together a process, doing some of the white chip applications might be a great way to kind of get started, and get into that. Another thing is shifting the, when you're going to the cloud, and instead of buying hardware, now we're paying for what we use. And it might be a little bit cheaper on some things, but it might be more expensive on others. Depends on how you use the services. It's very important to make sure that you are thinking about your runtime operations and what you keep out there. Because when you provision things, you can delete them when you're not using them. So a lot of development and test environments. For instance, I could go out and I could spin up an entire test infrastructure, deploy the application, run all my tests through it, and then delete the entire infrastructure and just pay for the 10 minutes that I was running the test, or the whatever time that was. Also making sure that when you're sizing into production, that you're treating production separately from everything else, that you've got a good way to manage and keep production safe. Having an open mind for looking at things. Sometimes we talk about the process versus the product. Are we looking at how do we get to the cloud, or are we looking at that one application running in the cloud, and sometimes stepping back and saying, let's look at the process and focusing on that. And then finally, let's have some reference architectures. There are a lot of examples out there, and there's great places where you can get help going out to do that. There's a lot of things that go in, they make this journey either good or challenging, but it can be fun too. Take a step at a time and just get out there, and then be aware of all the tools that can make it easier. Pay attention. Microsoft puts on conferences, and it's free, so you can go and get the latest things, and know about things like ARM templates. If ARM templates are confusing and complex, they're building Bicep, which is a language that allows you to transpile and create those ARM templates from that. Is going to make it make that a lot easier to work with. Things like learning how the different databases work and the different high availability and things like that. There's a lot of stuff out there, but with that, that's kind of what I had to say. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, there's a code there. You can just scan that, and then we'll be friends, and you can chat with me. Be glad to talk through things. I've got a Azure office hours every Friday, which is I should actually put that link on here. So let me do this. I'm actually going to do this. Azure office hours. Yeah, I'll get this link working. And if you have questions or you want to talk through any of this stuff, I'd be more than happy to take questions at this point. So, Kellen, is there any questions out there?
I haven't seen any come in recently, but I want to say that section on the blueprints and the infrastructure, that was pretty amazing. That was something that I haven't seen before. So, it's definitely great to see, where you can make the dev experience repeatable and manageable and enjoyable. Something that you can control rather than it being something that is an entity you have to go up against.
Yeah, the blueprints make it really nice to go out and set things up and be able to manage, the access to things. I recommend going out and trying it out. Cool.
I'll be sure to implement that in my own use. Yeah, that was quite an incredible workshop and presentation, and just how to. I lost my train of thought. Going from step 0 to 1, and just really making it clear how to go about going from absolutely nothing to. I like the way it was structured. Trying to think of what you call that cloud awareness. Kind of how it kind of builds out, and I really like the way you thought about that.
Thanks. The process of getting this put together so you can get the whole process of going to the cloud. There's a lot of ways to. There's a few things that it helps to know, and separating your production and your and non-production into different subscriptions, or at least in different resource groups is critical. Having naming standards, you can find stuff and know what things are. That's something that is another. When I first started playing with it, it's like, okay, when I'm using all these names all over the place. But once you have tools like the template to take in your input and then do all of the naming standards for you, then it's no longer trying to remember it. It's codified.
Right. You can actually enforce it instead of it just being an ideal that you wish you were doing, or something that you tell your team and you hope gets implemented.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and like I said, this stuff is on GitHub, and so yeah, if anyone has questions or whatever, I'd be more than happy to chat through that stuff. So
Okay. What was your office hours again, just in case anybody missed that, if they wanted to follow up and get in contact with you?
So if you go to calendly.com/mbenko, MSAM Coffee Clash, that's the Microsoft Cross America coffee group that I was trying to get together. But the Azure office hours are a free 15-minute chat about anything Azure. I keep my Fridays open for that. And so, if you want to run an idea or you're running into a problem with something, I know a few people, and if I don't know the answer, I could probably connect us with someone that could help us. So that's a free thing. It's free like ice cream, not like puppies.
Right.
You get what you pay for. But so yeah, that's what that is. And my website, benkotips.com, has links to that as well. So Azure Office Hours is on here, and then information on the link, and thinking about going to the cloud. That's kind of where we're going with. So.
Okay. Well, I'm not seeing anything else coming from the chat, so I'll go ahead and wrap it up unless you have any last words you want to leave us with.
Sure. Yeah, get out there and try it out. And we'll see you on the road when we can start getting back on the road.
Okay. Yeah, we'll be sure to keep inviting you back, and go ahead, and everybody, thank you for coming out. Thank you for everybody who made this possible. Thank you once again, Mike. Thank you, .NET Foundation. And go check out Mike on Benko Tips, and go check out his Twitter as well. So go ahead and wrap it up and say thank you, and have a good night, everybody.
All right.